In a shoemaker's workshop, as storm clouds gather overhead, you will discover one of autumn's most peaceful moments amid the scent of aged leather and the warmth of an oil lamp. Close your eyes and let yourself drift off to sleep, listening to the story and the crackling of the fireplace. I wonder where you are right now, which city you're listening from, whether you're in bed or curled up in a warm chair. Feel free to share in the comments if you like. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let me take you back to the autumn of it. In October 1889, right at the height of autumn, when the leaves were at their most vibrant, but also closest to death, in a small town nestled between green hills in the south of England, in this quiet, peaceful, almost forgotten settlement called Thornbridge, in the narrow streets with stone pavements, streets where countless people have walked on the same stones for centuries among the characteristic red brick houses of the Victorian era, with their constantly smoking chimneys and small but inviting windows. There was a shoemaker's workshop on the ground floor of a low building on the corner. The owner of this workshop was William Ashford, a man of 59. His hair had turned completely gray, a gray so close to silver, especially when the sunlight hit it. His shoulders were slightly hunched under the weight of the years. Like all craftsmen who did this work, the price of working bent over for hours on end, but his eyes were still extremely gentle, a clear blue, and in them there was a sparkle of wisdom, understanding, and compassion. And that afternoon, just as storm clouds began to gather slowly over the town, the sky darkening, electricity crackling in the air, he was working in his workshop, at his wooden bench, his forehead veins slightly swollen, with deep concentration, almost meditative focus. The workshop was located on the ground floor of a two-story brick building just off the main street, right next to the bakery on the corner that filled the air with the scent of fresh bread every morning. The building's facade featured a wooden frame that had turned a deep brown, almost chocolate colored, with the patina of years, perhaps even decades. The display window reflected the warm yellowish light from inside, and this light shone like a beacon of hope, especially on this gloomy day. Various carefully arranged samples of shoes and boots were displayed in the window, some newly made, shiny, covered in gleaming leather, objects that sparkled even in the sunlight, others waiting to be repaired, worn out, their heels seriously worn down, their stitching coming apart in places, but still bearing traces of their former beauty. And right above the door, swaying in the light breeze, hung a thick black painted wooden sign with gold-colored letters reading W. Ashford, Shoemaker. Since 1851 was not just a date, it was also an inheritance, the beginning of a tradition. William opened his workshop at the crack of dawn, before the sun had fully risen above the hills on the eastern horizon, accompanied by the first light of dawn. As usual, he had walked from his home, that small but warm stone house at the northern edge of town, with a few rose bushes in the garden, along the narrow stone-paved streets, following his familiar morning routine. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the cool morning air, that clean air, still untouched by the day's pollution. The sound of his footsteps echoed on the stone pavement in the silence of the morning. He exchanged greetings with a few early rising neighbors along the way, a polite nod without much conversation, because mornings were a time to respect the silence. And when he unlocked the heavy wooden door of the workshop, that familiar, deeply familiar smell greeted him, the smell of leather, beeswax, shoe polish, and the faint, smoky smell of the oil lamp. This mixture, this unique cocktail of scents, was even more familiar to him than home, more comforting, because this scent had been present every day, every hour of his life for 40 years. This scent had become part of his identity. His father, that old craftsman, had established this workshop many years ago, and William, then a 19-year-old young man, full of dreams, energetic but inexperienced, had begun his apprenticeship alongside his father. 40 years had passed since that day, 40 long, exhausting, but equally satisfying years. It was now afternoon, well past 3 o'clock, perhaps approaching 3:30, and the light filtering through the window was much paler, much duller, and grayer than usual, as if even the sun didn't dare to shine at full strength today, because the sky high above was completely covered with heavy autumn clouds. These clouds hung menacingly above, dark gray, ash-colored, even almost black in places, as if they could burst at any moment, and the wind had slowly but steadily begun to pick up. It rustled the leaves of the old plane trees on the street, those 100-year-old giant trees, tearing some leaves from their branches with its angry roar, spinning them in the air, then dropping them to the ground. William sat upright at his wooden workbench, his back slightly hunched, able to watch this melancholy scene through the window, but his eyes and hands were focused on the careful task at hand. In front of him, on the wooden surface of the workbench, stood a pair of work boots with thick soles, sturdy but worn stitching, but with the side seams seriously torn. These boots probably belonged to a farmer, or perhaps a construction worker, or someone who did very heavy physical labor. Dried mud stains had accumulated in layers on the leather, and the metal buckle was slightly rusted but still functional. William, using his thin-tipped metal awl, that trusty tool he had used for years, skillfully threaded it through the stitches, each movement extremely slow, extremely careful, without any haste. His hands, covered by those thick leather work gloves, softened by years of use, were protected by gloves that had almost completely taken the shape of his fingers, and each movement progressed with that familiar rhythm, repeated hundreds of thousands of times, with an almost musical harmony. This was not just a job, it was an art, a meditation, a way of life. The interior of the workshop was quite bright, despite the gloomy gray light outside. The reason was a brass oil lamp burning directly above the workbench. This lamp emitted a warm, almost living light. It spread out like a little sun. This light fell softly onto William's hairy hands, onto the rough surface of his leather boots, onto the wooden surface of the workbench, covered with scratches and stains. The flame in the lamp flickered slightly, as if it were alive, sometimes swaying more violently when the wind blew down the chimney, but it never went out. William loved this lamp. It was not just a means of illumination, it was a friend, a companion, and under this warm light, every corner of the workshop was visible. Wooden molds carefully hung on the walls, boxes of colored shoe polish neatly arranged on shelves, large rolls of leather in the corner, spools of string and thread, nails, hammers of various sizes, different types of chisels, sharp cutting tools. Everything was in its place, everything was orderly, everything served a purpose. When William finished sewing, it was almost 4 o'clock, maybe a quarter past, and at that very moment, as if nature had perfect timing, the first raindrops began to hit the window. At first, only a few drops came, like harbingers, with a gentle touch. Then more came, more frequently, more determinedly, then many more, as if the sky had made up its mind and could no longer hold back. And within a few minutes, as if someone had turned a faucet fully open, the rain began to fall violently, almost angrily. The raindrops hit the window pane, the wooden roof, the old stone pavement in the street with force, and this sound, that monotonous yet equally soothing, rhythmic, constant, unceasing sound, filled every corner of the workshop, every inch from the walls to the ceiling. William stopped working for a moment and just listened. This sound brought him peace. William carefully examined the boots he had repaired, then set them aside on the empty space to the left of the workbench. He slowly stood up, his knees creaking slightly, that familiar sound of aging bones, because he had been sitting in the same position for hours, perhaps 4 or 5 hours. He raised his arms and stretched them, stretched his back, and rotated his shoulders. Then he walked slowly toward the window, clasping his hands behind his back, his fingers interlocked, and stood gazing out at the stormy landscape, at the wild nature. The street was now almost completely deserted. A few poor souls were still walking hurriedly, struggling against the wind with the umbrellas they were trying to hold above their heads. The wind tried to bend and twist the umbrellas, turn them inside out, while the people struggled to keep them under control. And the rain was so heavy, so intense, that William could barely see the bakery window across the street. The rain covered everything like a thick gray curtain, blurring the world as if erasing the line between reality and fantasy. William silently watched this scene, his chest rising and falling slowly as he took a deep breath. The scent of damp air reached his nose, and a small smile appeared on his face at the corners of his lips, one of those rare, genuine smiles. He loved storms, though perhaps love wasn't quite the right word. He deeply appreciated them, respected them, because storms revealed nature's raw power, reminding him of how superior nature was, how small and fragile humans were. And this reminder, this lesson in humility, always did him good. When he returned to his workbench, he moved slowly, turning to his next task. This time it was a small, delicate pair of women's shoes, made of black leather. They were elegant, but worn. The heel was slightly worn down, the sole thinned, and in some places it was almost worn through. Looking at the shoe, turning it in his hands, examining it from every angle, he could guess who the owner was. Everyone knew each other in this town, and William had been doing this job for so many years that the shoes told him stories about their owners. These shoes probably belonged to an elderly woman who lived in one of the large, elegant houses on the east side of town. Perhaps they belonged to Mrs. Pemberton. She always wore them carefully every Sunday morning when she went to church. William carefully turned the shoe over in his hands, examining every stitch, every detail, determining exactly where it needed to be repaired. Then he took a new piece of leather from the shelf. This leather was soft, delicate, yet durable, perfect for women's shoes. He took his cutting tool, that old but sharp tool, and measured carefully. Every movement was calculated, every cut important, because the leather was expensive and there was no room for error. The rain was now beating down on the roof with such force, as if the sky were a sack filled with stones and someone were emptying them out. That sound, that constant, tireless, unceasing sound, created a deep echo inside the workshop, like the rhythm of a drum, sometimes slowing down, sometimes speeding up. The wind was blowing from all directions, east, west, everywhere. When it came down the chimney and seeped inside, gently swaying the flame of the oil lamp, the shadows on the walls danced like living creatures, as if they had come to life. And William, in this environment, accompanied by this natural symphony, continued to work with complete concentration, deep focus. Because he did not find this noise, these sounds disturbing, quite the opposite. These sounds relaxed him, calmed him, gave him peace, because these sounds reminded him that outside there was a vast, uncontrollable world, but inside, in this small workshop, he was safe, protected. This contrast, this opposition, gave him peace. As he carefully, meticulously trimmed the edges of the leather, making precise cuts with his scissors, his thoughts drifted back to the past, something that happened often. He thought of his wife, Margaret. Margaret had died 20 years ago of pneumonia during a cold and cruel winter, and William had lived alone ever since, in that empty house, that house filled with silence. They had had no children in their marriage. This was their greatest sorrow, but God had willed it so. And sometimes, especially on quiet evenings, William felt lost in this silence, in this deep loneliness, as if he had completely disappeared. But then he would remind himself that loneliness was not always a bad thing. Loneliness was sometimes peace, sometimes being able to listen to oneself, sometimes being able to sink into deep thoughts, sometimes just being, without any burden, without any expectation. And he had accepted these years, these 20 years spent alone, internalized them, because life had never been any different. Fate had written it that way, and he had decided to be happy with what he had in his hands, with what he possessed, and that too was a kind of wisdom. Around 5 o'clock, the rain began to slow down slightly, at first imperceptibly, then more noticeably, but it didn't stop completely. No, it didn't stop. It turned into a calmer, softer rain, constant, persistent, determined, but no longer violent or angry. It was as if nature had vented its anger and was now calmer, more serene. The sky was still dark, covered with thick gray clouds. The sun was probably setting, but it wasn't visible anyway, hidden behind the thick clouds, as if it had never existed, and an early, untimely darkness had fallen over the town. Even though it was only 5 o'clock, it felt like the darkest hour of the evening. But William didn't care, didn't pay any attention. He just kept working, doing everything he could to repair the young man's boots, because he had made a promise, and William Ashford was a man who kept his word. Replacing the soles of the boots took much longer than he had thought, because the old soles were in really bad shape, almost completely rotten, unusable, and William wanted to do everything right, to do it perfectly. He didn't want to rush. Rushing meant making mistakes, because he wasn't a man who did shoddy work. He never had been, and he never would be. He remembered the golden words his father had told him years ago, words that still echoed in his ears. If you're going to do a job, son, either do it right or don't do it at all. There is no middle ground. A half-done job is worse than a bad job, and William had always, in every situation, remained faithful to this principle, this philosophy of life. It was fundamental to his character. On his workbench, his tools were carefully arranged, each in its own place and its own order. The hammer, chisel, scissors, cutter, sanding stone, each tool had been used for years, worn out, aged, but still perfectly functional. They had been well maintained, cared for, and William used these tools, these simple yet indispensable tools, with the same skill as a musician uses their instruments. Every movement was practical, a skill honed over years. Every movement was natural, deliberate, memorized, automatic, because he had repeated these movements for years, for decades, and now he didn't even need to think. His body knew what to do. Outside, on the street, a few more people began to appear. The worst of the storm had passed, and people were slowly gathering their courage and starting to return home. Some were coming from the market, their hands full of heavy shopping bags. Some were coming from work, walking wearily, shoulders slumped, and everyone was tired. The traces of it were clearly visible on their faces, but at the same time they looked relieved, because a long, exhausting day was coming to an end, and the warmth of their homes, the fire in their fireplaces, the presence of their families awaited them. As William watched this scene from the window, stretching his back slightly and relaxing his muscles, he did not envy them, did not feel jealous, because he too would soon return home to his own small warm home, and there he would light his fire, set the dry wood alight in the fireplace. He would brew his tea in that teapot, the old teapot Margaret used, and perhaps he would read his book, or perhaps he would just stare into the fire, and that was enough. That was life to him. At 5:30, maybe a few minutes past, the repair of the boots was finally finished. William made the last stitch with great care. Skillfully, he cut the thread with a cutting tool, and he took the boots in both hands, lifted them up to eye level, examining them carefully, critically. The soles were new, sturdy, well placed with good workmanship. The stitches were strong, even, and would last a long time. Everything was in its place, every detail perfect, and William was deeply satisfied, content, because he had done a good quality job, a job to be proud of. And the young man could walk in these boots for many years, perhaps 10 years, perhaps more. And this thought, this simple thought, gave William a deep sense of peace, because he hadn't just repaired a pair of boots. He hadn't just used leather and thread. He had made someone's life easier, helped someone, added value to someone's life. And even though it seemed like a small thing, insignificant when viewed from the outside, it was extremely meaningful to William, extremely important. because the meaning of life lay in these small things, these small acts of kindness, these small acts of help. He carefully placed the boots on the corner of the workbench, on the right side, and he stood up slowly, weighed down by his age. He raised his arms and stretched them, his joints cracking slightly. He stretched his back, rolled his shoulders, and he took a deep breath, filling his chest, then slowly exhaled. He was tired, truly tired. He felt it in his bones, but at the same time he was satisfied. He felt peaceful, because today had been a good day, a productive day. He had done a lot of work, and he had done each task carefully, with great attention, without rushing. And now the day was almost over. Darkness had already fallen outside. Just then, as if perfectly timed, the door opened again. The little bell rang sweetly, and an old woman entered. Mrs. Pemberton, just as William had guessed. She always wore her black leather shoes when she went to church every Sunday morning. And now she was here to pick up her shoes. She wore a black, elegant hat on her head. She had on a thick wool coat, wet and damp. She held a black umbrella in her hand, and on her face, that old wrinkled face, there was a gentle, warm smile, a smile from her younger days. "Good evening, Mr. Ashford," said the woman, her voice soft, melodic. Was a slight tremor in her voice, given her age, but it was still strong, still full of life. "I hope I'm not disturbing you too much at this hour. I came to pick up my shoes. You know, I'm going to church on Sunday, and, William politely and respectfully nodded his head from behind the counter, bowing slightly. "Good evening, Mrs. Pemberton," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Not at all. No need to apologize. Your shoes are ready, carefully prepared. I'll bring them right over." And he walked slowly to the shelf. There they were, the small black shoes, carefully repaired, polished, buffed, almost like new, as if they had been made yesterday. She gently picked up the shoes, held them in her hands for a moment, gave them a final check, then handed them to the woman. Mrs. Pemberton took the shoes, took them in her old hands, examined one shoe, then the other. She looked carefully at every detail, every stitch, every shine. She looked through her glasses, a sparkle of admiration and appreciation in her eyes. And then she looked at William straight into his eyes. There was deep gratitude in her eyes, a sense of thanks. "Thank you so much, Mr. Ashford," he said, sincerely from his heart. His voice trembled slightly. It was an emotional moment. "You really are wonderful. You're perfect. You always, every single time, do a perfect job. This town is lucky to have you. Very lucky." William blushed slightly. His cheeks turned a little red, because he wasn't used to receiving compliments. They made him uncomfortable. "It's just my job," he said softly, modestly, almost whispering. "I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Pemberton. Nothing else." Mrs. Pemberton smiled, that warm, motherly smile of hers. "You're too kind, Mr. Ashford," she said, shaking her head slightly. "But I want you to know, truly know, that we consider ourselves very fortunate to have a tradesman like you, a craftsman like you, in this town. We are truly fortunate." She carefully took a neatly folded banknote from her coat pocket, unfolded it, and placed it gently on the counter. William took the money, worn, tattered banknote. He looked at the money, then at the woman, nodded his thanks. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton," and Mrs. Pemberton carefully placed the shoes in her bag. Then she took her umbrella, smiled at William one last time, that warm, grateful smile, and she went outside, through the door, into the rain. As the door closed slowly, bell rang again with a sweet sound, and William was left alone. Alone again, with that familiar loneliness. For a moment he just stood there, at the counter, motionless. He thought deeply, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile appeared. His face, one of those rare smiles, because these small gestures, these little thank yous, these warm words, made life worth living. These were life's small but precious treasures, and William was collecting them in his heart. one by one, carefully. 5:45, maybe 10 minutes before the young man arrived, hurrying out of breath. He had come to pick up his boots. His hair was dry now, combed. He was wearing clean clothes, washed, ironed clothes, and there was a hopeful, excited look on his face, like a child coming to receive a gift. William took the boots from the corner of the counter, held them in both hands, and handed them to the young man. When the young man took the boots, holding both of them in his hands, his eyes lit up. They really lit up as if little lights had turned on inside them. "These are amazing," he said excitedly, almost shouting. "They're amazing, unbelievable. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashford. Truly thank you from the bottom of my heart. You saved my life." William, with the calmness of a wise man, gently shook his head. "You're welcome, young man," he said, his voice fatherly, protective. "It's nothing. I hope they serve you well. I hope you use them for many years." And the young man took a few coins out of his pocket, counted them, and placed them on the counter. Then he thanked him again, one last time, enthusiastically, sincerely, and he walked out, striding quickly, as if he were flying. William watched the door close. Then he returned to his counter slowly. He looked around, his eyes scanning every corner. There was no more work to be done today, nothing left unfinished. Everyone had come. Everyone had picked up their boots and shoes. And now, finally, it was time to close the workshop. The day was over. He began to pack up his workbench. That daily ritual, that familiar motion. He carefully placed the tools back in their places, each one by one. The hammer on the wall, he hung it on the hook. Slowly, he placed the nails into the small tin box, tapping them in. He put the scissors on the shelf neatly. He organized the pieces of leather, folded them, and placed them on the shelf. He did everything carefully. Slowly, he didn't rush. He never rushed, because he wasn't a person who rushed. He never had been. And this final ritual, this closing ceremony of the day, gave him peace, a sense of relief, because when everything was in its place, when everything was orderly, his mind was also in its place. His mind was calm, peaceful. He extinguished the oil lamp, slowly pulling down the wick. The flame slowly shrank, flickered, resisted for a moment. Then it went out completely, giving off a faint puff of smoke, and the workshop grew a little darker. The shadows deepened, but the faint light coming through the window was still enough to move around. Outside, it was getting dark now. Night was falling on the town. William could see the street lamps. They must have been lit recently. The man who lit the lamps must have passed by. The yellowish light reflected off the wet, shiny pavement, and the light was hazy in the air. And this scene was beautiful, melancholic, sad, but just as peaceful. The unique beauty of autumn. He took his coat. It was a thick wool coat, heavy, warm. He had been using it for years, maybe 10, maybe more. It was worn, the elbows thin, the color faded, but it was warm, very warm, and that was enough. He put it, slipping his arms in one by one. He buttoned it up, from bottom to top. Slowly, he took his hat, a woolen hat, brown, old. He put it on his head, tilting it back slightly, and he took one last look at the workshop, his eyes scanning every corner. Everything was in its place. Everything was tidy. Everything was ready for tomorrow. When tomorrow morning came, when he opened the door, everything would be exactly here, in this position, in this order, and this thought him confidence, gave him stability, gave him peace, because it was nice to have something in life that didn't change, something predictable. He walked toward the door, his steps heavy but determined. He took the key out of his pocket, an old iron key, heavy, cold. He stepped outside, across the threshold. He turned back one last time, looked inside at that dark, familiar workshop, and he closed the door, the heavy wooden door. He locked it. Turning the key twice, it clicked. He put the key back in his pocket, deep in his pocket, and for a moment he just stood there, motionless, breathing. He took a deep, full breath. The air had cooled, seriously cooled. The air was damp, wet, but clean, perfectly clean. The storm had passed, completely passed, and only a calm, still evening remained. Stars had even begun to appear in the sky. The clouds had dispersed in some places. The moon was shining, a half moon, pale yellow, and puddles of water still lingered on the streets, reflecting the moonlight. He started walking down the street with heavy but steady steps. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't running. He had time to get home, plenty of time, and the streets were wet. Everywhere was wet, glistening, puddles everywhere, big and small, and William walked around them, carefully, deliberately. Sometimes it wasn't possible to jump over them. The puddle was too wide. Then he had to walk through it. His shoes got a little wet. Water seeped in, but he didn't care. He didn't mind, because these were old shoes anyway, worn-out shoes, and tomorrow he would dry them by the fire. It wasn't a problem. There were a few more people on the streets. Few people sparse. Some were still going in and out of shops, doing their last shopping. Some were walking home with quick steps in a hurry, and everyone looked tired, shoulders slumped, heads bowed, but at the same time, they looked peaceful, they looked relaxed, because the end of a long, tiring day had come. All the tasks had been completed, and now it was time to rest. Now it was time to be at home. Now it was time to sleep. And William was part of this community, this small town community, an important part. These people knew him, and he knew them. He had lived here for 40 years, serving these people for 40 years, and that gave him a sense of belonging, a sense of rootedness, a sense of value. He might have been alone, but he wasn't isolated. He wasn't excluded. He belonged somewhere. He belonged to a community. As William walked home, slowly making his way, every street, every corner, every building he passed was familiar, very familiar, because he had been walking these streets for decades, perhaps 40 years. Every day, every season, every stone, every building, every tree, all were filled with memories, happy memories, sad memories, ordinary memories. That bakery, the one on the corner, it was where Margaret bought fresh bread every Saturday morning. He remembered it, could see it before his eyes. Margaret would go there early in the morning and buy warm bread. She would come home, and the smell of bread would fill the house. Those were good days, very good days. The little park there, with its grass and benches, that was where they would go for walks together. On Sunday afternoons, when the weather was nice, they would walk hand in hand. They would talk, sometimes walk in silence. They would feed the pigeons breadcrumbs. These were simple but happy moments. And that house on the corner, the one with the blue door, it was the home of his old friend, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson had also died 3 years ago, suddenly, of a heart attack, and now that house belonged to someone else, someone he didn't know. Time was changing everything, constantly changing it. The past was always there, in William's mind, in his memory, in his heart, but he didn't live in the past. He wasn't trapped in it. He just remembered the past, from time to time, reminiscing. And these memories were no longer painful, no longer as sharp as they used to be. They were just melancholy, slightly sad. And melancholy was sometimes sweet, sometimes sad, but it was always human, always real, always valuable. When he arrived home, finally arrived home, it was completely dark. Night had fallen on the town, a pitch-black night. The stars were shining above, countless stars. William's house was small, a single-story stone house, low, simple. It had a small garden in front, with an iron fence. Now that it was autumn, there wasn't much in the garden, just a few dry branches, a few withered leaves, brown grass. But in spring, oh, in spring, it was filled with flowers. Tulips, hyacinths, daisies. Margaret loved the garden very much. She tended to it every day, and William still planted a few seeds every spring in Margaret's memory in her honor. It was a ritual for him, a sacred ritual. He opened the door, inserted the key into the lock, turned it. He stepped inside, crossed the threshold. He closed the door behind him, pushing it gently, and the silence of the house greeted him. That deep, heavy silence. This silence was sometimes heavy, very heavy, making it hard to breathe. Sometimes it was light, peaceful. Today it was light, today it was good, because William was tired, but peaceful, satisfied. And being tired wasn't a bad thing. Being tired was proof that he had worked, proof that he had produced, proof that he had lived. He took off his coat, slowly, one arm at a time. He hung it on the old wooden coat rack by the door. He took off his hat and hung it underneath, and he walked into the living room with heavy steps, his body tired. The living room was small but comfortable, warm. This was William's world. There was a chair, an old leather chair, sagging, worn but comfortable. There was a table, wooden, scratched. There was a fireplace, a stone fireplace, old, solid, and there was no fire in the fireplace yet. It was cold, empty, dark. But William immediately started a fire. He knew how to do this very well. He had been doing it for years. He took the wood from the corner, from the pile. Dry wood, oak wood. It burns well. He arranged the papers, placed them underneath, crumpled them up. He struck the match. A slight scratching sound came, and the fire slowly began to catch. First the paper burned, then the thin branches, then the thick logs. The flames were small at first, yellow, flickering. Then they grew stronger, turning red, then orange. And the room began to warm up, slowly, gradually. This warmth, this heat, felt very good to William, warming his bones, warming his soul. He went into the kitchen, through the small door, down the narrow corridor. The kitchen was even smaller, but functional. He filled a small teapot with water, turned on the tap, and let it run. He put the kettle on the stove and lit the fire. The water began to heat up, slowly, and then it began to boil. Then he went to the cupboard, the wooden cupboard. He took some bread, half a loaf, stale but edible. He took some cheese, yellow cheese, hard. He prepared a simple dinner, bread, cheese, maybe some olives, because he wasn't someone who lived to eat. Food was just a necessity for him, a requirement. He only ate to survive, not for taste, not for pleasure, and that was enough, sufficient for him. It met his needs. As the tea brewed and its aroma filled the air, William looked out the window. The kitchen window was small and square. The street lamps were still lit, casting their yellow glow. A few people were still walking on the street, but very few, just a handful. But most of the houses were dark now, their windows pitch black. People were getting ready for bed, probably already in their nightclothes, and soon William would go to bed too, in a few hours. But first he would drink his tea, rest a little, catch his breath. He poured the tea into his cup, a white porcelain cup, sturdy and unchipped. He carried it carefully to the coffee table in the living room. He sat down on the couch, sank heavily, and sighed deeply. He sat facing the fire, watching the flames, and as he sipped his tea, moistening his lips, he thought about today, running it through his mind. Today was a good day, a really good day. Business was good. The customers were happy. Everyone was satisfied. The storm had passed. The air was clear. And he was here, warm, safe, peaceful, in his own home, in his own chair, in front of his own fireplace. And he didn't want more than that. He didn't need more than that. This was enough. This was perfect. After finishing his tea, after drinking the last drop, William leaned back in his chair, rested his back against it, tilted his head back. He closed his eyes slowly, heavy eyelids, and he just listened quietly, pricked up his ears. He listened to the sounds coming from outside, a dog barking in the distance, low, ominous. The wind hitting the trees, rustling the branches, the sound of water dripping from a gutter, drop by drop, rhythmic. And these sounds calmed him, soothed him, brought him peace, because these sounds were the sounds of life, the sounds of nature, and life went on, always going on, never stopping, never slowing down. He listened to the crackling of the fire, focusing on it, the sound of the wood burning, the crackling sound, the hissing of the fire, the whispering sound. And this sound reminded him of his childhood, that distant, beautiful childhood. He and his father would sit in front of this fireplace on winter nights. His father would tell stories, long stories, interesting stories, war stories, adventure stories, love stories, and William would listen, wide-eyed in awe. And those stories were always comforting, reassuring, not frightening, not tense, just calm, just warm, just safe. His father was protecting him, watching over him. Now William was sitting in front of this fireplace too, but now he was alone, completely alone. There was no storyteller, no listener. He only had his own thoughts, his own memories, and his thoughts were also a kind of story. Stories of the past, stories of today, stories of an uncertain tomorrow, and they all mixed together, intertwined, became inseparable. And William wasn't bothered by this. He didn't complain about the confusion, because life was like that. Confusing, uncertain, chaotic, but at the same time meaningful, beautiful, valuable. He thought of Margaret again, once more. She would sit here every evening, right here, beside him. Sometimes she would knit, the needles clicking. Sometimes she would read a book quietly. Sometimes she would just sit quietly, stare into the fire, think. And William missed those moments, missed them deeply, those quiet, peaceful, meaningful moments. But he had also accepted it, accepted the truth, because Margaret was gone now. She had died, she was gone, and she would never come back. Never. And William had suffered that pain, carried that deep pain on his shoulders for years. But now the pain had lessened, its sharpness gone, and all that remained was a longing, a gentle longing, a sweet longing, a longing that did not hurt. William opened his eyes slowly and looked around. The living room felt so familiar to him, as if it were an extension of his own body. Every corner, every object told a story. The painting on that wall, a landscape Margaret loved, a cottage by the sea. Sunset Margaret had bought it at a market a year ago, very cheaply, but to her it was priceless. "Look, William," she had said excitedly, "when I look at this painting, I find peace. I feel like I'm going there. And that shelf over there, the wooden shelf, it was a shelf his father had made. He had made it with his own hands when William was still a young boy. The nail marks were still visible. It was rough, but it was sturdy, durable. It had been standing there for years, never moved. There were a few books on it, Margaret's books, mostly poetry books. William didn't understand poetry very well, but Margaret loved it and read a little every day. "Poetry nourishes the soul, William," she would say, "just as food nourishes the body." On the table was a small frame, wedding photos, black and white, faded, the corners creased. But William smiled every time he looked at that photo. They were so young, so full of hope. Margaret wore a white dress, simple but elegant. William wore a suit for the first time in his life, and both of them looked at the camera with serious faces. Back then, it wasn't customary to smile in photos, but there was happiness in their eyes. Everyone could see it. William took the photo in his hand and looked at it closely. He focused on Margaret's face, that young face, that smooth skin, those bright eyes. What would Margaret look like now if she were old? Would she have wrinkles? Would her hair be white? But William always remembered her like this, young, beautiful, full of life. Perhaps this was for the best. Perhaps not seeing her age was a blessing. Death had taken her young, and she would remain that way forever, never aging. He put the photo back, slowly, carefully, and then leaned back in his chair again. The fire was still burning, but it was calmer now. The flames smaller. The logs were glowing, red and hot. William added another log to the fire, using the tongs. The log rolled onto the others, sparks flying, and the fire reignited, regained its strength, grew. This little house, was William's world now. There was a big world outside, yes, cities, countries, oceans. But William didn't belong to that world. He belonged to this little town, to this little house, and that was enough for him. Some people sought adventure, wanted to see new places, wanted to go far away, but William found peace here, found himself here, in these familiar streets, these familiar faces, these familiar smells and sound. Margaret once asked him, "William, don't you ever wonder about the world? London, Paris, Rome? Don't you ever want to see them?" And William thought long and hard. Then he had answered, "Maybe in another life I would want to see them, my love. But in this life, here, with you, this is enough. This is perfect." And Margaret had smiled, holding his hand. "You're special, William Ashford," she had said. "You're different." Was he really different? William didn't know. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. But he didn't care. He was just trying to be himself. Trying to be honest, hard-working, a good person, and that was enough for him. The world could forget him. History could leave him out. But he had lived. He had loved. He had worked. He had created things. And that was meaningful. That was valuable. Time was passing now. William could feel it without looking at the clock. His body felt tired. His eyes were growing heavy. Sleep was approaching, but not yet. Not for a few more minutes. He didn't want to waste these last few minutes. In front of this fire, in this peace, in this silence, because life was in these moments, these small, still, seemingly ordinary, but actually very precious moments. He took a deep breath, one last time. Then he slowly stood up, his knees creaking. He took one last look at the fire and smiled. "Good night," he said, as if the fire were alive, as if it could hear him. Maybe it was silly, maybe it was a sign of old age. But William didn't care. Sometimes the silliest things were the most meaningful, and he walked toward the bedroom. Slowly, he passed through the hallway, the dark hallway, but he wasn't afraid. He was at ease, because this was his home, his world, and here he was safe, always safe. William took off his clothes slowly, carefully, without rushing. He undid each button one by one, playing with them with his fingers. He placed each piece, his shirt, his pants, on the hanger in the closet, hanging them carefully. Because he was a tidy man, always tidy, he didn't like chaos, and order comforted him, gave him peace, gave him confidence. He put on his pajamas, soft cotton ones, old pajamas, faded patterns, torn in places. He had been wearing them for years, maybe 10, maybe more. Margaret had bought them for him as a birthday present, and William had worn them ever since, every night. Out of loyalty, he lay down on the bed, slowly settling in. He sat on the edge of the bed first, then slowly lay down on his back. He pulled the blankets over himself, thick woolen blankets. He laid his head on the pillow, the soft pillow, and he took a deep breath, filling his chest. Then he slowly exhaled through his lips, through his nose, and he relaxed, loosened up, let himself go. Lying in bed, he watched the ceiling, the white ceiling. There were faint shadows on the ceiling, moving shadows. Moonlight filtered through the window, the shadows of tree branches falling on the ceiling, and these shadows moved slowly, swaying in the wind, as if they were alive, as if they were living. And William watched these shadows, mesmerized, lost within them. His thoughts slowly began to disperse, to blur. His mind began to empty completely. And this process was natural, because fatigue was coming, heavy fatigue, sleep was coming, deep sleep. He thought about today, one last time, one last analysis, how he opened the workshop in the morning, how he turned that key, how he repaired the boats, how he sewed those stitches, how he watched the storm, how he listened to that rain. Mrs. Pemberton, that kind old woman, the young man, that hopeful young man. He remembered them all, ran them all through his mind, and these memories were now faint, blurred, uncertain, like a dream, a distant dream, because the day had passed, completely passed, ended, and the past was past, irreversible. He thought about tomorrow, the uncertain tomorrow. Tomorrow would probably be the same again, the same routine, the same tasks, but it would also be, and it would definitely be different, because every day was different. Every day was unique. Every day brought new things, small things, seemingly insignificant things, but still new, still different. And William was open to these new things, ready for these differences, because life gained meaning through newness, found meaning through change, lived through movement. His eyes began to grow heavy. His eyelids grew heavy. His eyelids slowly closed, sinking heavily. He opened them again, forcing them open. Then they closed again, closing without resistance. And these closings and openings gradually slowed down, became less frequent, and finally, at last his eyes closed completely, shut tight, and they did not open. They did not open again, and William began to fall asleep, slowly, gently, peacefully, quietly. His breathing slowed, deepened, became regular. His chest rose and fell slightly, rhythmically, monotonously, and there was only this sound in the room, this quiet, peaceful sound of breathing, and those distant sounds from outside, the sounds of the night, the sounds of nature, the wind, leaves, the sound of a distant car, an owl hooting, and they all blended together, forming a soft melody, a lullaby, and William was lost in this melody, completely lost, gone. But he wasn't quite asleep yet. He was on the edge of that deep sleep, in that uncertain place, half awake, half asleep. His thoughts were still flowing, but they were no longer logical, no longer coherent. Images passed through his mind, fragmented, seemingly meaningless but carrying meaning. For a moment, he saw his father's face, young, strong, smiling. Then he saw Margaret's hands, slender, graceful, knitting something. Then he saw her workshop, but it was different, brighter, more spacious. Then it all vanished, blending into the darkness. And as William drifted among these images, clinging to none, merely observing, he felt safe. This chaos did not disturb him, for it was natural. The chaos at the door of sleep, and he was ready to pass through that door, ready to cross that threshold. In a corner of his mind, far away, almost inaccessible, a small worry appeared. Would he be able to open the workshop on time tomorrow? Would he be rested enough? But this worry was very faint, very distant, and William didn't pay attention to it, didn't give it any power, because he got up every morning. He was ready every morning. It had been like this for 40 years, and tomorrow would be the same. His body knew when to wake up. The clock inside him worked precisely. There was no need for worry. He felt the weight of the blanket on him, the comforting weight, as if someone were gently pressing down on him, protecting him, wrapping him up. And this feeling reminded him of his childhood. Every night his mother would pull the blanket over him, tuck it under his chin, kiss his forehead. "Sleep well, William," she would whisper, and little William would feel safe. He knew he was protected. He knew he was loved. Now his mother was gone too. She had died many years ago, but that feeling was still there. He still carried that sense of security within him. He wiggled his toes under the blanket, stretched them slightly. Then he relaxed, let go. He moved his legs slightly, found a comfortable position. He crossed his arms over his chest, interlaced his fingers, and this position felt good. It fit perfectly. His body had found its place, relaxed, ready for sleep. A sound reached his ear, very distant, almost like a dream. Maybe it was a train whistle from outside the town. Maybe it was a church bell, a midnight bell, or maybe it was imaginary, a trick of his mind. It didn't matter. William listened to the sound for a while, then it too faded away, blending into the silence, and all that remained was that deep, absolute silence. William's breathing was now almost inaudible. It was so slow, so low, it was as if he weren't breathing at all. His chest was still rising and falling slightly, but very little, very slowly. His heartbeat had slowed, calmed down. His body had now completely switched to rest mode. His muscles were relaxed, all tension gone. His jaw was slightly open, his lips parted. His facial features had softened, appearing gentle and peaceful. Even the lines on his forehead had softened. The weight of the years had lifted, and now the world of dreams was calling him insistently. That door had opened, the threshold had been crossed, and William was stepping into that world, slowly, without hesitation. His conscious thoughts had now completely stopped. There were only images, only feelings, only that vague, fluid dream world. Perhaps he saw himself young in this dream, 20 years old, strong, energetic. Perhaps he was working in his studio, but the studio was filled with sunlight sparkling. Perhaps Margaret was there, smiling, talking, but her words were inaudible, only her presence felt. Perhaps they were walking in a meadow, hand in hand, flowers everywhere, colors vivid, the sky deep blue. Perhaps it was none of these. Perhaps it was something completely different, something indescribable, inexpressible. The moonlight moved slowly across the room, its angle shifting as time passed. The beam of light streaming through the window traced the wall, moving slowly. The shadows changed, shifted shape, danced. But William no longer saw any of this. He was somewhere else entirely, in a different world, in the deep, peaceful world of sleep. And there, in that world, there was no time, no space, no worry, no pain. There was only being, only peace, only tranquility. And the town slept with him, sleeping deeply. People slept in all the houses, in all the rooms. Children were dreaming. The elderly were resting. The young were imagining tomorrow. And they all shared the same night, under the same sky, in the light of the same moon. William was not alone. He had never been alone. He was part of a community, part of a whole. And this knowledge, this feeling, carried him deeper into an even more peaceful sleep. The night passed quietly. The hours passed. And William Ashford, the 59-year-old shoemaker, continued to sleep peacefully in his small stone house, in his warm bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, but now there was only night, only sleep, only dreams. And that was enough. It was perfect. It was exactly as it should be. We don't know what he saw in his dreams. We can't know because dreams are private, personal. Perhaps he saw Margaret, her younger self, her smiling self. Perhaps he saw his father, that old craftsman, that storyteller. Perhaps he saw his younger days, his energetic days, his days of dreams. Perhaps he saw nothing at all. No images, no scenes. He saw only darkness. Deep, peaceful, endless darkness. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter at all, because he was asleep, fast asleep, and sleep had enveloped him, completely enveloped him, embraced him entirely. And he was safe, protected, peaceful. The town was also asleep, completely asleep. The houses were dark, all the houses pitch black. The streets were empty, not a single person in sight. Only the street lamps were lit, just them, and they too would slowly fade away, one by one. When morning came, at dawn, a new day would begin, a bright day. But now it was night, only night, deep night. And night was a time for rest, a time for sleep, a time for dreams. And everyone was asleep. The whole town was asleep. including William. He was asleep too, and this sleep was deep, peaceful, dark, safe, warm. Hours passed, silently passing. The night grew deeper, even deeper. The moon slowly set, completing its journey across the sky. The stars revolved, following their own orbits, and time flowed, flowing ceaselessly. But William was motionless. Still, he was only breathing, only living, only sleeping, and the world kept turning, never stopping, never slowing down. And now, right now, you too, just like William, have reached the end of this long day. You have reached the end of this journey. Perhaps you too are tired, very tired. Perhaps you too worked today, sweated, struggled. Maybe you watched the storms, listened to the rain, or maybe you did none of that. Maybe you just rested. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Because now, right now, is the time to rest. Right now is the time to sleep. And this story, this long, quiet story, was meant to bring you here, to this peace, to this calm. It was meant to give you this gift. Close your eyes if you haven't already, please. Take a deep breath, a very deep one. Breathe in the coolness, the cleanliness of the air, then slowly exhale. All of it. Let all the tension go. Let it flow away. Let your shoulders relax. Let them drop. Let your jaw relax. Let it soften. Your hands can rest by your sides or on your stomach. However you feel comfortable, however you feel at ease. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is that you are comfortable, that you are at peace. Slow down your breathing. Deliberately slow it down. Feel your heartbeat. Listen to it. Feel your chest slowly rising and falling. Be aware of it. And with each breath, with each inhale and exhale, feel yourself relax a little more. Notice yourself loosening up a little more. Rejoice in finding a little more peace. Because now there is nothing left to do. No tasks to complete. Nothing to think about. No problems to solve. Only being here. Only existing, only breathing, only sleeping. Let your thoughts flow. Let them flow freely. Don't try to hold them back. Don't try to control them. Don't try to stop them. Don't try to block them. Just let them pass. Let them flow away. Like a river, like flowing water, like clouds, like passing clouds. They will come and go, and you will just watch. Watch silently. But you will not hold on to them. You will not possess them, because now is the time to let go, the time to surrender. It is time to rest, time to find peace. Your day is over, completely over, finished. No matter how beautiful it was, no matter how successful it was, no matter how difficult it was, no matter how exhausting it was, it's over now. It's gone. It's history. And tomorrow will be a new day. A fresh day, but tomorrow is tomorrow's problem, tomorrow's issue. Now there is only night, only darkness, only silence. And this silence is beautiful. This silence is precious. This darkness is peaceful. This darkness is protective. And you are within this peace, within this protection. You are safe, completely safe. Feel your body sinking into the bed, completely sinking, or into the chair, or wherever you are leaning. Feel your weight being pulled down. The effect of gravity. Notice gravity slowly pulling you downward. And this pull is good. This pull is natural because you are safe, completely safe. You are supported, held, and you don't need to hold on to anything. You don't need to control anything. You can just let go, surrender. You can just rest, just be. Sleep is coming, slowly coming, approaching. It comes gently. It comes quietly. You can feel it. You can sense it. Your eyelids getting heavy, closing. Your body relaxing, softening. You feel your mind becoming foggy, slowing down. And this sleep is pleasant, very pleasant. This sleep is warm, embracing. This sleep envelops you, embraces you, protects you, and you allow it. You accept it. because sleeping is natural, completely natural. Sleeping is beautiful, very beautiful. Sleeping is necessary, vitally necessary. Now sleep, just let yourself go. A deep sleep, a very deep sleep, a peaceful sleep, a restful sleep. And when you wake up in the morning, when you start your day, you will feel refreshed, renewed. You will feel rested, strengthened. You will feel ready, eager. But don't think about these things now. Now just sleep. Listen to the sound of the fireplace. Good night, very good night. Deep sleep, the deepest sleep, and peaceful dreams, the most beautiful dream. Sleep is coming, slowly coming, approaching, gently coming, quietly coming. You can feel it, you can notice it, your eyelids growing heavy, closing, your body relaxing, softening, your mind blurring, slowing, and this sleep is pleasant, very pleasant. This sleep is warm, embracing. This sleep surrounds you, embraces you, protects you, and you allow this. You consent to it because sleeping is natural, completely natural. Sleeping is beautiful, very beautiful. Sleeping is necessary, vitally necessary. Breathe in a deep breath, slowly. Draw the air inside, fill your lungs, and then release, slowly release, along with all your tension. One more breath, deeper, slower, and release, completely release. Feel your body becoming even heavier, even more relaxed, even softer. Your toes are comfortable, your feet are comfortable, your legs are heavy, very heavy, sinking into the bed. Your hips are comfortable, your back is loose, your shoulders are low, your arms rest by your sides, hands open, comfortable. Your neck is soft, your jaw is loose, your forehead is smooth, your eyes are closed, very comfortable. And outside, in the distance, there are sounds of nature. The gentle whisper of wind, very distant, very soft. The faint rustling of leaves, calming, repetitive. Perhaps an owl hooting in the distance, in a low voice, peaceful. Perhaps water dripping from a gutter, drop by drop, rhythmic, monotonous. And these sounds don't disturb you. On the contrary, they calm you, because these sounds remind you that there is a world outside, that inside you are safe, warm, secure, protected. Listen to the sound of the fireplace, that gentle crackling, the soft hissing of burning wood, the occasional pop of a spark. And this sound is like a lullaby, ancient, comforting. The sound has accompanied humanity for thousands of years, around campfires, in hearths, in fireplaces, and now it accompanies you into sleep, into rest, into peace. Your breathing is now very slow, very deep, very regular, in and out, in and out. And each breath takes you deeper, deeper into relaxation, deeper into calm, deeper into sleep. Your body is now completely still. Not a single muscle is tense. Everything is loose. Everything is soft. Everything is at peace. And your thoughts, those final thoughts, are now fading. Like smoke rising from a candle, dispersing, disappearing. You don't need to think anymore. You don't need to plan, to worry, to remember. All of that can wait until tomorrow. Now there is only this moment, only this breath, only this peace, only this sleep. You are safe, completely safe. Nothing can harm you here. You are in your own space, your own sanctuary, and sleep is wrapping around you like a warm blanket, like a loving embrace, like coming home after a long journey. Now sleep, just let yourself go. A deep sleep, a very deep sleep, a peaceful sleep, a restorative sleep. And when you wake in the morning, when you begin the day, you will feel renewed, refreshed. You will feel rested, strengthened. You will feel ready, willing. But don't think about that now. Now just sleep. Just listen to the fireplace. Good night. Very good night. Deep sleeps. the deepest sleeps and peaceful dreams, the most beautiful dreams.